You ever meet someone who seems to hate you the second you walk into their world? No reason, no logic, just pure, simmering dislike. That was my 9th grade honours English teacher, the one person in my entire school career who couldn't stand the sight of me. I wasn't a troublemaker, I wasn't rude, and my grades were solid. But she looked at me and saw a target, and by the end of that year, she'd turned my classroom into a battlefield I never asked to fight in. From the first week, her attitude toward me was different. Every time she called my name, there was a little pause, a twist of annoyance in her tone. I played 3 sports, basketball, baseball, and soccer, which meant I occasionally missed her class for away games. Every other teacher was fine with that. They knew it was part of representing the school, but not her. She made it painfully clear she had no respect for athletes. She'd make snide comments about meatheads who think they can dribble their way through life, and the entire class would go silent. And even when I missed class for academic competitions, science fairs, quiz bowls, math tournaments, she'd lump it all together like it didn't matter. In her eyes, if I wasn't sitting in her classroom, I was lazy. The crazy part, I actually liked English. Writing essays, reading plays, analysing stories, that was my thing. But with her, everything became a test of endurance. She would wait for the perfect opportunity to make things harder for me. If the basketball team had a Friday night away game, she'd coincidentally double the homework due on Monday. And she'd make sure to check it right after we returned, even though she usually didn't check daily. Everyone noticed it. The team, my classmates, even other teachers. But no one wanted to confront her because she had this reputation for being tough but brilliant. Translation: no one wanted to deal with her attitude. The first real punch came with our essay grades. I still remember the first paper I handed in, a detailed analysis of the Odyssey. I spent hours writing it, going above and beyond, because I actually enjoyed that topic. When she handed it back, there were no red marks, no notes, no corrections, just a big red 78 at the top. Meanwhile, the guy sitting next to me had a paper bleeding in red ink with crossouts and corrections everywhere, and he got a 93. I stared at my paper for a full minute, confused. When I asked her why I'd scored so low, her answer felt like a slap. She looked me straight in the eyes and said, "You're only working at 70% of your potential. I grade based on potential, not just effort." I was stunned. So my paper could be better than someone else's, but I still get a worse grade. She gave me that tight, satisfied smile, the kind that says I'm in control here, and replied, "Exactly." That's when I realized she wasn't grading my work. She was grading me. But the irony, she later recommended me for an advanced writing class, a full year before students were even eligible. If I was so lazy and underperforming, why push me ahead? It made no sense, unless she needed to keep the illusion of fairness in front of the administration. That was her style: manipulate, control, and always look untouchable. By the middle of the semester, I wasn't just frustrated. I was angry, but I kept it bottled up. Every day felt like walking into enemy territory. If I raised my hand too often, she ignored me. If I didn't, she called me disengaged. If I aced a test, she'd accuse me of not showing my work. She wasn't teaching anymore. She was punishing. Still, I kept pushing. My mum was a teacher at the same school, so she knew what I was going through. But even she told me to tough it out. It was humiliating. My classmates joked about it sometimes, how I could get the same answers as someone else and still end up 20 points lower. I laughed along, but deep down it ate at me. Every time she smirked while handing me a low grade, I felt that quiet burn inside. That voice whispering one day, "She's going to regret this." Then came the extra credit project that would change everything. It was near the end of the school year, and the tension between us had reached a silent war. She stood in front of the class one Monday morning and announced, "For those who want to improve their grades, I have an opportunity. You'll attend a live performance of Antigone at the local college this weekend. Write a 2,500-word analysis connecting it to our class discussions, and submit your ticket and program as proof. It's due Monday morning. No exceptions. At first I thought it was fair. Hard work for extra credit. I was in. But the problem, that same Monday, I had to compete in the biggest academic event of the year. Not just a random competition, one that required months of qualifying rounds. I'd earned my spot representing the school. So I did the responsible thing. I told her immediately, "Hey, just letting you know, I'll be gone all day Monday for the regional academic meet. I won't be here to turn in the essay." She nodded and said, Turn it in Tuesday morning, first thing. I'll note it down. That was a week before the play. I reminded her again on Wednesday, and again on Friday. Each time she said, Tuesday morning is fine. So I followed the rules, exactly as she'd said. I went to the play Friday night, wrote the paper Saturday, polished it Sunday, and spent all of Monday competing. Where I placed first in one category and second in another, I was proud, exhausted, and ready to hand in my essay. Tuesday morning, 7 a.m., before basketball workouts, I knocked on her door. She looked up from her desk, and I said with a grin, Got my Antigone paper right here. Her eyes narrowed. You're late, I froze. What? You told me Tuesday morning was fine. She shrugged. I don't recall saying that. For a second, I thought she was joking. I told you multiple times. Doesn't matter, she interrupted, holding out her hand like she was dismissing a child. You should have found a way to turn it in Monday. I stood there, completely speechless. I explained that another student who went to the same event had turned theirs in because they lived right across the street. I lived 20 minutes away and couldn't drive. I even pointed out that my mum was a teacher here. She could have handed it in, but I didn't because she told me not to. Her response? That's not my problem. I wasn't letting it go that easy. The paper's done. You can check the file. The last modified date was Saturday afternoon. I didn't touch it after that. She didn't even look at it. Rules are rules. No credit. I can still feel that mix of humiliation and anger washing over me in that moment. I'd done everything right. Every single thing. And she refused to acknowledge it just to prove a point. I walked out of that room with my heart pounding in my ears, clutching a 2,500-word essay that might as well have been trash in her eyes. That night, my mum found me pacing the kitchen. When I told her what happened, she was livid. She wanted to go straight to the principal, but I stopped her. I didn't want to look like a whiny kid crying over an essay. I wanted this to end the right way, not by running to someone for help, but by letting karma handle it. From that day forward, something inside me shifted. I stopped trying to please her. I stopped chasing her approval. Every snide remark, every fake smile, every unjust grade, I just absorbed it, quietly, waiting, because deep down, I knew she'd eventually push the wrong button, and when she did, I wouldn't need to say a single word. The truth would expose her. What I didn't know then was that my final exam, the one she was so proud of, the one no student had ever gotten an A on, would become the stage for her downfall. As the semester dragged on, I started realizing that no matter what I did, I could never win with this woman. I'd go above and beyond on assignments, research, edit, polish, and still get low grades without a single note of feedback. Everyone else's papers were filled with red ink corrections, yet somehow scored higher than mine. It was almost like she didn't even read my work, just saw my name and decided the grade beforehand. Still, I tried to stay respectful. I'd walk into class, smile, say good morning, and she'd look right past me as if I wasn't even there. The class itself had become torture. She'd crack jokes about how some students think being good at sports makes them good writers. Everyone knew that was aimed at me. It was embarrassing. My friends would glance at me with that uncomfortable, just ignore her look. But I couldn't ignore it anymore. I'd worked too hard to be treated like garbage for no reason. The turning point came when she introduced an extra credit project toward the end of the year. She announced that anyone who wanted to boost their grade could write a detailed review, 2,500 words, on the upcoming local theatre performance of Antigone. The essay was due Monday morning, right after the weekend showings. Sounded like a solid opportunity, right? Except, of course, she knew I had an academic competition that Monday. Not a game, not sports, an academic contest representing the entire school, and she'd known about it for weeks. So I went up to her after class, being as polite as I could, and said, "Ma'am, I'd love to do this paper, but I'll be at the competition Monday. Could I turn it in Tuesday morning instead?" She barely looked up from her desk and said, "That's fine. Just make sure it's ready by then." I even reminded her again later that week, just to be safe. She nodded, said, "Yes, Tuesday morning's fine." Perfect, right? That weekend, I watched the play, took notes, and poured everything into that essay. I didn't just summarize the story. I analyzed it, talked about the conflict between individual conscience and authority, compared it to modern social issues, and tied it all together with a clean conclusion. It was one of the best papers I'd ever written. I printed it, saved it on a flash drive, even backed it up to my email just in case. Monday came, and I left town early for the competition. It was a long day. Hours of intense testing and problem solving, but totally worth it. I won first and second place in 2 categories, representing the school at a national level. I was proud, exhausted, but proud. Tuesday morning, I woke up early, before sunrise, just to make sure I handed that paper in before basketball workouts. I walked straight to her classroom, knocked politely and said, "Good morning, I've got my Antigone paper." She looked at me over her glasses, cold as ice, and said, "You're late." I laughed nervously, thinking she was joking. "No, remember, you said I could turn it in Tuesday morning since I had the competition." She shook her head slowly. "I don't recall that conversation." My stomach dropped. "Wait, what? You told me that's fine." She shrugged. "Even if I did, that was your responsibility to make sure it got here on time. You could have emailed it or sent it with someone." I stood there stunned. I didn't think I had to. "You said Tuesday was fine." She just turned away and said, "0 credit. I can't make exceptions." That was it. No second chances. No discussion. I tried explaining that my mom, who also worked at the same school, could confirm what I'd told her, but she didn't care. She started grading papers right in front of me, like I wasn't even standing there. I showed her the document info on my flash drive, proving I'd written it before the due date, but she didn't even glance at it. "It's not about when you wrote it," she said flatly. "It's about when I received it." I could feel my blood boiling, but I bit my tongue. I wasn't about to lose it in the middle of class. I just turned around and walked out, my hands shaking. When I told my mom what happened, she was furious. She said she'd talk to the administration, but I told her to leave it. At that point, I didn't even want help. I wanted justice. That 0 dropped my grade several points, knocking me just below an A. Months of effort gone over pure spite. I could have given up right there. But instead, I decided to play her game and win. Over the next few weeks, I focused harder than ever. I studied like crazy for the final exam, the one she bragged about every year. She always told students, "No one's ever gotten an A on my final." She said it with pride, like failing kids was a badge of honor. I made it my personal mission to break that streak. Every class, I took extra notes. I reread every book, every essay we'd ever done, memorized her test patterns, her trick questions, her vocabulary lists. I was quiet, strategic, patient, because I knew this was my chance to beat her at her own game. Then, a few days before the final, she tried to humiliate me one last time. We were doing a little farewell activity where she asked everyone to share their biggest wish before summer. Kids said stuff like, "I wish I passed my driver's test," or "I wish for good grades next year." When it was my turn, I smiled and said, "I wish for an A on your final exam." The whole class laughed, and she laughed the loudest. "Yeah, and I wish for $1 million, and to not deal with you anymore," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. The room went silent for a second, and I just nodded and said, "We'll see." That's when I knew. This wasn't just about a grade anymore. This was about proving that no matter how unfair someone is, they can't hold you down forever. The night before the final, I didn't sleep much. I reviewed every note I'd ever taken, went through each essay question from the last few years that seniors told me about, and made sure I was ready for anything she could throw at me. When I walked into that classroom the next morning, I wasn't nervous. I was laser-focused. She handed out the test. 100 multiple-choice questions, 2 essays, and 1 5-point bonus question at the end asking, "What was your favorite part of this class, and what did you learn this year?" The irony of that question didn't escape me. I smirked, knowing exactly what I'd write when I got there. But first, I flew through the test. Every question, every quote, every literary device. I nailed them. I'd studied for this moment, and I wasn't letting her win. When I finally reached that bonus question, I leaned back in my chair and took a deep breath. That's when I decided it was time to let it all out. When I got to that final bonus question, asking what I'd learned and what my favorite part of the class was, I sat there staring at the paper for a good 30 seconds. It wasn't nerves, it was control. I could feel the anger bubbling inside, but I wasn't going to let it come out as rage. No, this was going to be surgical. I wrote that I hadn't learned a single useful thing from her class because she never taught. She only criticized. I wrote that my favorite part was it finally being over. I said the only lesson she'd ever taught me was how to recognize a bully hiding behind a teacher's title. And then, for the final line, I wrote, "If this school wants to know what kills students' motivation, they should start with you." I signed my name, closed my exam booklet, stood up, and walked to the front of the room. The only student to turn in the test early, out of more than 100. The sound of my footsteps across that silent classroom felt like a drum roll for justice. She looked up surprised and said coldly, "Done already?" I said, "Yes, ma'am," placed the test on her desk, and walked out without another word. The next few hours were brutal. I waited outside the gym for my mom, who was proctoring another exam, just trying to cool down. And then I heard her heels echoing down the hall. My teacher, red-faced, eyes teary, storming straight toward me, in her hand my exam. "Come with me," she barked. I followed her to the principal's office, my stomach tight, but my mind sharp. She slammed my test on his desk, tears welling up, shouting, "This is completely disrespectful. He insulted me in his final essay. This is unacceptable behavior." The principal looked at her calmly, then turned to me. "What happened?" he asked. I told him everything, every unfair grade, every sarcastic comment, every time she'd mocked me in front of the class. The Antigone essay she refused to accept, even though I had proof it was done early. My mum walked in a few minutes later. Apparently she'd been called too, and she backed up everything I said. The room went dead silent. The teacher kept interrupting, saying I was exaggerating, saying she was holding me accountable. But the principal wasn't buying it. Finally, after nearly 45 minutes of back and forth, he looked at her and asked, "How many points was the essay worth?" She sniffled and said, 5. He nodded and said, "Then don't give him the 5 points." That was it. Meeting over. I could see the fury in her face as she snatched my test and stormed out. I didn't know it then, but that small moment was the start of her downfall. A week later, grades came out. I got a 98 on the final exam, missed only 2 questions, while the rest of the class barely scraped into the 80s, even with the bonus points. That meant I'd done what she swore no student could ever do, earned an A on her final. When I saw that score, I didn't even smile. I just nodded, because that wasn't luck. That was karma, written in ink. But of course, she couldn't let it end there. A few days later, I checked my final report card and noticed something weird. One of my earlier assignments, one that had been graded months ago, suddenly dropped 10 points. My overall average now sat at 94.4, just below the cutoff for an A under the old grading system. She'd done it on purpose. I couldn't prove it, but I knew. The timing, the number, it was too perfect. She wanted the last word, so I let her have it. I didn't argue, didn't complain. I just walked away, knowing deep down that life would handle it. And life did. That summer, the school district announced a major grading policy change, moving to a 10-point scale. That meant anything 90 and above was now an A. My 94.4 automatically became an A. Her little sabotage, erased. The same week the new policy rolled out, the principal informed all English teachers that from now on, every assignment would need to be approved and recorded digitally by the department chair. No more hidden grade changes. No more forgotten permissions. No more power games. She'd basically exposed herself by trying to hurt me, and the system corrected itself right after. But karma wasn't done with her yet. 2 years later, I heard through the grapevine that multiple students, and even a few parents, had filed complaints about her behavior. Turns out I wasn't the only one she'd tormented. She'd been caught playing favorites, giving inconsistent grades, and even refusing to accept late work she'd verbally approved. Eventually, the school district let her go. Fired. Just like that. She vanished from the staff directory one day and never came back. Some people said she moved to another district. Others said she left teaching altogether. Honestly, I didn't care. The truth was simple. The same cruelty she'd used to belittle others had finally caught up with her. Looking back, I don't regret anything I wrote in that final essay, because everything I said was true. She taught me more about integrity and patience than she ever realized. Not through her lessons, but through her failure to live by them. When people ask me about revenge, I always tell them, sometimes you don't need to destroy someone. You just need to let them keep being who they are, and karma will finish the job. That's exactly what happened here. She mocked me for wishing I'd get an A on her exam, laughed in my face, told me it'd never happen, but life has a funny way of giving people what they deserve. I got my A, both on paper and in principle. She got her lesson, just a little later than she expected. In the end, I didn't have to expose her, embarrass her, or fight her. The truth did that all by itself, and maybe that's the biggest revenge of all, knowing that I stayed calm, worked hard, and won the right way, while she lost everything trying to make me fail. That final grade, it wasn't just a number. It was poetic justice.